His Divine Grace, Sri Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Diti replied, "My dear Brahmana, I must accept your advice and follow the vow. Now let me understand what I have to do, what is forbidden, and what will not break the vow. Please clearly state all this to me." Purport. As stated above, a woman is generally inclined to serve her own purposes. Kashyapa Muni proposed to train Diti to fulfill her desires within 1 year, and since she was eager to kill Indra, she immediately agreed, saying, "Please let me know what the vow is and how I have to follow it. I promise that I shall do the needful and not break the vow." This is another side of a woman's psychology. Even though a woman is very fond of fulfilling her own plans, when someone instructs her, especially her husband, she innocently follows, and thus she can be trained for better purposes. By nature, a woman wants to be a follower of a man. Therefore, if the man is good, the woman can be trained for a good purpose. Ditiruvacha dharayishya vratam brahman bruhi karyani yani me yani cheha nishiddhani navratam gnanti yanyuta. Diti replied, "My dear Brahmana, I must accept your advice and follow the vow. Now let me understand what I have to do, what is forbidden, and what will not break the vow. Please clearly state all this to me." Om Jnana Timirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutali Swayam Rupa Kadamahyam Tadati Swapadantikam He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagatpati Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Suti Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vanchakalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhyeva Pratitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shadvaita Gadadhara Shivasadi Gaur Bhaktivinoda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. So, after hearing this purport by Srila Prabhupada, how do you make sense of it? How do you understand it? Any comments? Yes.
Yes, my first thought is I heard something about how to be a good woman, how to be a good man, a good husband, and there was stated that the women today, they are trained to manage everything on their own, and so there is no need for a husband, and so they get a little confused about their feelings. So their life will not be as happy as it can. So I remembered this because she's now following an instruction of a man, and she thinks she will get her luck. She will get lucky because she's following the instructions. Doesn't matter what she will do. She want to kill Indra. That's maybe not so. Not so good.
Okay.
But she will find her luck in following the instruction of her husband or something like this. That was the thing I immediately came into my mind.
Anyone else? Well, first, what is the context? We have to see. It's very important when we hear statements of Shastra and the explanations of the Acharyas to see the whole picture. What is the discussion? What is the situation? What is the context? And here Prabhupada actually doesn't mention anything about today. He just speaks in general, and it could be interpreted like a woman is generally inclined to serve her own purposes. So what about men? They are not inclined to serve their own purposes. One can conclude that's only about women, but what men not, right? We tend to take things very in absolute terms and generalize them, and especially, Prabhupada has this style of expressing this is how it is. And then another statement, which is different, and then we get confused. And if we look back at the verses in one of the purports, Prabhupada, in the purport to the verse where Kashyapa Muni is using the word serving own purposes of self-interest, Prabhupada said, whether a man or a woman, everybody is trying to serve their own purposes. So that's another statement. But if we isolate only this, women, only women are inclined to serve their own purposes. And we can get confused. Why is that? Does that apply to all women? And are there any exceptions? And like that. So we have to see the context. And the context is that Kashyapa Muni is quite upset. Do you remember that actually the word used in one of the previous verses, that he was angry? He replied in an angry mood, although he was speaking very gently. That's the Vedic culture. And especially towards women. Bhagavatam is very specific in another, I think it's not in the 6th canto, where it specifically said one should not treat harshly women and punish them by any means, physical especially. So it's forbidden. So he's angry. Why? Because she had this determination to kill her own, nephew and a great devotee of the Lord, Indra. And why she wanted that? For protection of her own sons and own children. That's her own purposes. It's not that egoistic, but she thought, if Indra is killed, because he defeated my children, so I have to do something to protect them. So let me serve my husband, and he's a great sage, very powerful, and he can fulfill my desire. So she did that, and Kashyapa said, okay, I'll give you any benediction. She said, okay, I want to kill someone. Who? Indra. Oh. So he gets angry, and he starts speaks about women in general. He says women are so beautiful, like the blooming autumn lotus, and then they speak very, their voice is very charming, but actually if you study the heart, it's sharp like a razor. So again, does that apply to all women at all times? Obviously he's upset, and that's what he says, and he's not accusing them or her in this case, because in that verse he says, he doesn't blame actually. He said, well, that's her nature. By nature she's having this desire, but it's my fault. That's quite rare, if especially if somebody takes this, here's a nice description about the real nature of women. What Prabhupada in the purport says, this is here Kashyapa Muni nicely explains the nature of woman from a materialistic point of view. So it's a materialistic explanation, and he goes on to explain how if we are under the modes of material nature and make distinction and are in bodily concept of life, we are always in danger. We always get in trouble, no matter man or a woman. And then Prabhupada says, no matter one is man or a woman, that's what happens when you are in a bodily concept of life. So in this particular case, Diti, feeling affection for her own children, wants to get rid of the rival. That's her own way. But we see so many examples in Shastra where materialistic men, or those who are clouded by materialistic desires, they also try to kill their rivals, right? Nobody blames them, this is the man's nature, But that's what it is. All conditioned souls who are covered by the material modes, that's what happened. We get in danger. And Prabhupada explains the only safe way is to be Krishna conscious. Whether a man or a woman, we have to be trained. And it's for all. It doesn't matter, again. Prabhupada says it doesn't matter whether one is a man or a woman. One can get free of the influence of material modes if takes to Krishna consciousness. So, there are different cases in Shastra. It's not that a woman only or weak and desire something unusual. Men also do that, and there are many examples. And sometimes even women reproach men who are chaste and virtuous women. They point to the men. Well, that's not right, right? Any examples you can remember of such cases? Like the opposite. Somebody makes a mistake. You could say due to the manly nature. For Mahabharata, I thought of some example. But Draupadi actually reproaches Yudhishthira Maharaj. And she says, how could you do that? You are the personification of Dharma. And you must know the highest principles. How can you gamble away your wife? How can you do that? Just because you followed your, you wanted to keep your honor by always responding to the challenge of a gambling. So there's some code, a kshatriya should respond, but is that the highest principle than to protect your wife and the kingdom? And no, of course, but it's mentioned there that Yudhishthira, and he admits also, I made mistakes. He was influenced. He didn't give up. That was particularly a nature of a man. He wants to be victorious always. Cannot be a loser. And that's the man's ego. You challenge me, I will respond. And then this discernment, the intelligence is clouded, so you can make mistakes like him. So there are different explanations and examples in Shastra, and we have to study whenever it's something is explained very carefully so that we don't misinterpret it. And this is part of the correct understanding of Shastra in the way of interpretation. What does it mean? So usually we have to see always the context, who is speaking, because these are statements within stories. Stories are about people have feelings, and there is something which is happening, and unless we take into consideration that we can't extract this statement and say this is the absolute truth about everything and everyone, because it's not. For example, another example similarly of statement, if you hear, for example, like that's in 8th canto, Sri Bhagavan Uvacha, and so here's Bhagavan is speaking, it must be the absolute truth. Vishvasam pandito jadu kaminishu nayati hi. A learned person never puts his faith in a woman. Okay, is that an absolute statement about all women? What is the context? Do you know the context of this statement? Who is speaking? 8th canto, beginning of the 8th canto. What's the story? What happens in the beginning of 8th canto? There is a very famous story also described in the Vedas. The churning of the milk ocean. But just after that happened, they've got the real thing, the nectar. And what happened? Who helped the demigods? They get it. Krishna. Krishna actually appeared, Vishnu, in all kinds of forms. As Kurma, also he was helping because they couldn't carry the mountain. He was on top helping them in a different form as Vishnu. And finally he came, but not as his Purusha form, but as a Stri form, as an enchanting woman. So she spoke this. A wise man should not trust Kamini. This is a specific word, not just a woman, but so if you hear that, okay, is that an absolute state? Like Prabhupada quoted Chanak, a Pandit of similar quoted politicians and women shouldn't be trusted. And often when he quoted, he was joking. And Yamuna remembers that 4 times she was in the presence of Prabhupada when he quoted that verse. And she said, and these 4 times he always looked at my eyes to see how I will react. She was telling that story to say how Prabhupada had this very human nature of joking, and he liked to see, how devotees would react. So he wanted to see what she will say, will she protest or not? And so in one of the times he said, "So, Yamuna, what would you say?" She said, "That's right, Prabhupada." And said, "Yeah, but you're not a woman. You're a Vaishnavi, you're a devotee." So anyway, this is a Chanaka, and this is half of the verse, but he says one should not put trust in a river, in holders of weapons, in animals who have sharp horns and claws, as well as women and Raja Kuleshu, the members of the royal order. So again, what is the logic here? And there are also similar verses in just this common Sanskrit aphorisms, similar things, There it said, don't trust also a madman or insane, like that. So again, if you take it, is that means that what it means you don't trust. It means that no woman is honest, or there is no integrity, or they are not moral, and they're all the same. It just doesn't make sense. There are so many examples of Shastra of virtuous and chaste ladies who are, their word actually can stop the sun. In the Mahabharata, this story, and so many stories. Like in Vishnu Purana, there is a story about a family of Vaishnavas who were very devoted to Vishnu, and they were worshipping, and they followed once Ekadashi. They had a strict vow of not speaking, not fasting. It's a short story, but very instructive, I think. And so they were doing their vrata, and somebody came and asked them for direction or for something, I forgot. And then the man answered him. So he brought his vrata. But the wife didn't. She kept the vrata. So just because of that mistake, he had to be born as a dog in the next life. That's quite an extreme reaction for breaking a vrata. Next time you follow Ekadashi and make a vrata. Of course, that was in a different yuga. But anyway, I was really kind of shocked to hear. What? This is the reaction? You break your promise just by answering someone's question. You become a dog, and that's a Vaishnava, that's a devotee. We hear, devotee who is Ananya Bhakti, Apichet Suduracharo, right? No matter what, if makes even Durachara, great Sudurachara, great sin, should be considered virtuous or righteous, more or less sadhu. And then Krishna says, next verse in 31, 9th chapter, my devotee would never perish. So how is this applied to that case? And many other cases, by the way, where devotees do make mistakes. So are they excused from getting any reaction by this verse? No, they will never perish, but Krishna will never leave them. And the verses 30, Apichet Sudurachara, is about others, how they should be respectful to someone who has an Ananya Bhakti. But it doesn't mean they are immune to reactions in legal or social way. For example, Lord Chaitanya, when they came and reported that one of his very dear devotees, the brother of Ramananda Rai, Gopinath Pattanayaka, he was put in this very severe way of punishing someone who has stolen or misappropriated money from the king. You put some spears, and then you throw the person on top. So they already prepared him because he had some debt of 200,000, whatever was the measurement, some small conches or something like that. And he tried to negotiate with the Maharaj Prataparut, the son, and he said, here is, I will give you this number of horses, and then you keep them, and I will pay back, something like that. But the son of the king, he calculated another price. He gave a smaller price, and then Gopinath Patanaika kind of a little bit insulted him by saying, my horses, at least they're so good, they don't look like that in the sky, because this son of the king had some kind of a tick or something to look in the sky up. So he became angry. He said, you go, I punish you to death. So devotees ran to Lord Chaitanya, please save him, please save him. He said, what can I do? The king is right to collect his due taxes. So, Lord Chaitanya said, this is right. I'm a sannyasi. Do you want me to go and beg from the king 200,000 so that I free him from his debt? Are you suggesting that? I'm just a sannyasi. I can go and beg, but 2 or 20, but not 200,000. It's not proper for a sannyasi. So they again pleaded, please save him. He's your so dear devotee. But Mahaprabhu didn't do anything. Of course, another devotee, he went to the king. Maharaj Prataparudra explained the situation. He stopped it and he reviewed the whole thing. And then he said, oh, there must be a mistake. I actually free him from the debt and increase his salary. It ended up in a different way. The point is that Mahaprabhu didn't reject that some devotee can make mistake and not be punished. So anyway, the whole point I was saying that in this story, this devotee had to suffer because of breaking the vow. He was born as a dog. So what happened with his wife? She was so great and honest, and that she also took next birth, but as princess, and she remembered everything, and she was, I have to help my dear husband, who is a great devotee. He just is suffering his reaction. So she was, by some signs, she traced him and find that he is a dog and try to preach to him. You were previously a king, and I was your wife. You have to remember you're a devotee of Vishnu. And first the dog was like, "What are you?" Anyway, it ended up nicely, and then he remembered, and they were all born after that and went back to Vaikuntha. So, anyway, many cases of virtuous ladies who can be, of course, trusted completely. So this should be taken into consideration in that context, and especially Chanaka's verse. He's advising a king, and the king should be very careful with certain things, with armed people, with other kings or politicians, and with certain ladies, because at that time, one of the most powerful weapons rival kings use, or this Prabhupada speaks about this in some purports. They train them from small girls, even they give them certain type of poison, which in small doses doesn't kill them, so they go like a kamini, like a nice, wonderful, attractive girl, and the king's like, yeah, come in. and then she kisses him, and that's it. The kiss of death. Or at least they use them as spies. So you don't trust, she's smiling, but actually she may want to kill you. So in this context, or like Mohini Murti, she actually in this verse, she says, I'm a courtesan. I'm a prostitute. That's the word she uses. So, and why you trust me? I'm coming, and are you sure? She said, no. The demon said, yes, tell us what to do. We'll follow. She said, are you sure? I'm a prostitute? And no sane may trust the kaminis, such women. But again, if we take just the words and how it is, Shastra says, don't trust women. Oh, I don't trust any women, but that doesn't make sense, Like, why Bhagavatam then has so many statements, some of the most sophisticated philosophy and poetry, especially spoken by women, like prayers of Queen Kunti and all the Gitas in the 10th canto of the Gopi Gita, Venu Gita, Yugala Gita, Brahmara Gita, 6 Gitas are there. So these are the highest expressions of devotion. They are spoken by women. So, we shouldn't trust, so we don't take them seriously. Of course, it's the context. It's so important, and we have to understand it properly. And then it makes sense. Yes, here Prabhupada is just said. This is just a general nature. She's protective about the family, and then she wants to serve her own purpose. The purpose was to kill Indra, not just for pleasure. She had this in mind, but it was extreme. So that's why Prabhupada says that was the inclination, and her husband, who regretted, it's my fault actually. I did a mistake. I did not control my senses. He didn't blame her. So, and he said, okay, I'll devise a means that I'll give her some process that she'll get purified and she'll forget about this desire anyway. And then Prabhupada goes on to say, well, that's another part of the psychology. Woman is innocently following, or has this simple-heartedness. And this is a very good quality, and Prabhupada says in the Krishna book, in the story of the Brahmanas, Yogic Brahmanas, who regretted after they made mistakes and they were glorifying their wives. And Prabhupada says, this is the advantage, that women have this simple-heartedness. Let me read it. I think I have it here. Women in general, being very simple at heart, can very easily take to Krishna consciousness. And when they develop love for Krishna, they can easily get liberation from the clutches of Maya, which are very difficult for even so-called intelligent and learned men to surpass. This is a great advantage of having such a nature of soft heart and having this innocence. So again, we see all these instructions and understand them in a proper way. They are positive qualities of the womanly nature and also of manly nature, and also negatives both. And when we encounter such statements, we again have to consider what's the context, and also have to consider what other statements are there. Yeah, another story I remember from Brahma Vaivarta Purana. It's in the beginning, and Brahma is telling Narada to get married. He is in the beginning of the creation, and Narada is one of the sons, so that's the way you encourage them to increase the population. So Narada gives a whole, long description of similar to what here Kashyapa says, the nature of women, and deceitful and sharp, razor heart and things like that. And he gives different categories. That's one interesting thing. He speaks of different, not all are the same. He says there are women who are sadhvis and others who are very low. They just want to enjoy themselves, don't care about anything. But in general, he's saying they're all selfish, and you won't get any benefit by associating. So he was talking only negatively, and it's justified because he doesn't want to follow what his father says. He doesn't want that. But Brahma, it's interestingly, he says, he continues, and finally he convinces him. But his argument, I got this verse also, is interesting. He says, no, you cannot criticize a woman. He says, oh Narada, only a girl born in some low family becomes harsh and wicked and acts according to her own will. O son, all the ladies cannot be wicked because they happen to be race of Lakshmi. It actually says Kamala, Kamala, what is it, the Sanskrit? Kamala, Kala. Kala means the expansion of expansion. So they are, expansions of Lakshmi. So they cannot be all wicked, like Narada was making a point. No, they are all bad. I don't want anything to do with them. But Brahma says, no. It's just only some of them who are not educated or born in low families and like that. So only those are self-interested. So Narada agrees and says, okay, but I first want to purify myself and then I'll get married. So give me a Krishna mantra. I want to worship Krishna. And Brahma says, well, it's not proper for a father to give a mantra. It's not proper also, he uses that word also, which Mohini Murti uses, Kamini. Not also proper to get mantra from Kamini. He gives a whole father, different persons whom you cannot get mantra or shouldn't get. Or you can get, but won't be so beneficial. So it seems that the women were also giving mantra, so it means diksha. But he was saying, don't take it from a Kamini woman. And then says, actually best you go to Shiva and he will give you the Krishna mantra. And the story goes on that Narada does that. So anyway, as a conclusion, I would say that we have to understand statements of Shastra and of the Acharyas in a very careful way, especially when they sound kind of puzzling or contradictory or extreme, and not try to impose our own interpretation, but just study them and see them from different angles of vision, discuss them, and then try to make sense encompassing different statements. And then we are safe to not make some wrong conclusion. Any comments, reflections? Yeah.
Thank you very much for a wonderful lecture. I just have a reflection, and I'm very happy and thankful that you made this point of very consciously and seeing what is behind everything, and not just what is stated like a verse or whatever. This is such an important point that it's making the whole picture different, actually. But, yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Another example, again, of a context, which is kind of extreme, but I don't know if any one of you heard of you, like somebody said, Prabhupada quoted Shastra that a drum, a dog, and a woman should be tuned by beating, by hitting the drum. That's how you tune it, and the dog. And so I don't know if I heard it, and I haven't read it. And one time I was like, I have to see what is the context. Anyone heard that? Maybe not. Okay, you're fortunate. But I heard devotees using that to justify actually beating devotee women, which is like extreme, And unfortunately, we have cases of horrible cases of things happening that happened in ISKCON in the past. So this was justified, and I read once the whole thing where Prabhupada quoted, and it's not Shastra, it's a verse from Tulsidas, the poet of the Ramcharitamanas, of which Prabhupada said he's a half Mayavadi. That's one thing, but anyway, so that's in end of the 60s in New York, and it's a conversation. And Prabhupada is talking in a way, telling some stories, and he said, well, Tulsidas was very attached to his wife, his young wife. He was extremely attached. And, in Indian culture, that's also, we read in Shastra, that's what Srimati Radharani also does. When she got married, and she's living in Yavat, but she goes to Varshana for some time in the year, right? That's the custom. the girl, because she is always feeling separation from her family, she goes for 1 month or some time during the year to her family, goes back. So that's what happened to the wife of Tulsidas. She went, and it was kind of far away. And then he was so feeling such a separation that he couldn't wait. So next day he left after her, and he went to her place. And when she saw him, she was so, "What are you doing here? You know, how can you be so attached?" And she actually, reprimanded him, just like we know the story of Bilva Mangala Thakur and again prostitute, Punch Chalaya. The prostitute Chintamani, when she saw, how can you come in this weather, just after the funeral of your father? You're insane. If you had that determination to worship Krishna, you would be perfect devotee. You're coming for this carnal pleasure. And then he got revelation, Bilvamangataro. But Tulsidas, he wasn't so happy from what Prabhupada said. So he got kind of offended, and he developed a specific attitude towards women after that. And he said, so he came up with this verse, and he quotes that. The a drum and a woman should be tuned by hitting. And they're all laughing, and Prabhupada said, and even today some uncivilized tribes in India follow that. So if you don't say the beginning of the story and the end of the story and says Prabhupada said and quote some Sanskrit, then you can make a completely horrific conclusion, then taken out of the context and weird. Unfortunately, that's there in our society. It's pure ignorance, but we can make such big mistakes and offenses. And I remember actually speaking with one devotee who was, because I was in a certain situation. There were some men devotees saying, justifying there should be some disciplining of women through physical means, and I was like very upset by how can, first of all, this is about devotees, and any violence toward devotees, especially physical, is extreme offense. It's Vaishnava Parat. But leaving aside it, how can you justify it? So one of the arguments, one devotee was telling me, no, it's like this, that the woman is, when she's married, she doesn't have karma. All the karma goes to the man. When I heard that, I was like, what? How on earth can someone make such a conclusion? It's completely the opposite of what we hear. Everyone is responsible about their own, decisions and actions. How can, you just get married and no more karma? It's all transferred, Anyway, but then it goes on. So the man is responsible for all the karma, so he has to discipline the wife, and if it's not possible by words, he has to use, physical means. I said, where did you get that from? Bhagavatam. I said, where in Bhagavatam? Where do we see examples of who is doing that? And just silence, because there's nothing in Bhagavatam. It's just exactly the opposite, as I said, in a specific verse says the women should never be treated harshly and disciplined in such a way. So, we can speculate such nonsensical conclusions and do big offenses out of pure ignorance and who knows what, But sometimes it seems like we are losing our power of discrimination, especially if we make distinction about men and women. Here, that's one of the discrimination. Woman is more emotional in that sense. That's why, again, the verse "Don't trust" is connected also with that side of it. That's also in Dharma Shastras. They are not first in the list of witnesses when the king has to call witnesses. When it's about women to be trialed, therefore, definitely women should be witnesses. But in general, because of their astita buddhi, unsteady mind or emotions, sometimes they change. So therefore, better have a trustworthy fixed brahmana who can, make a vow and make a statement as a witness, and more steady intelligence in that sense. But again, it doesn't mean that they are not trustworthy. It's just in particular legal setting, it's preferred because of the nature again. But it's not good and bad, It's more proper. So anyway, if we make this distinction, and the man is supposed to have more steady and intelligence and discrimination and discernment of what Shastra says, to come to such a conclusion, there's no buddhi at all, what to speak of steady or deep intelligence. So there are so many examples of things taken out of context and presented in different way, half-truth or completely untruth, or just some part of it, and then if we're not, thoughtful and wise, by the way, the word for wisdom and wise, a quality which is different word from buddhi. Buddhi is mostly intelligence, understanding, and like that. But medha is wisdom, is a specific type of practical intelligence, and this is specific quality of whom? Krishna says that. Yeah. Krishna says in the Gita, I am in the intelligence of the disintelligence of woman, the practical wisdom. So, if we encounter something or hear with something, we shouldn't immediately, either believe it or take it without questioning, without discrimination, and asking, okay, especially if it sounds weird, strange, or doesn't make much sense. So we have to examine it carefully, and then if we understand, we see that there is not actually a contradiction. There are different angles of vision, and it all makes sense if we properly interpret Shastra. Any more reflections? Yes.
I was thinking about interpreting the scriptures. I think as long as we are conditioned, we all have different mind setting, and when we read, we also take out of it what is more relevant to us. And how is it possible that with our conditioned vision that we can take the scripture like they are, and that there is not interpretation or think more like this than more like that?
Okay, very nice question. Well, it's impossible in the conditioned way to understand. That's why Madhvacharya actually says we have to understand scripture through great devotees who can see, who have direct experience of truth. That's what Krishna says. Approach Gyani, a wise devotee who has seen, Tattvadarshi, who has seen the truth. In the context where Madhvacharya says that is, he speaks about, it's in his commentary on Mahabharata, and he begins with that. He says that of all the available manuscripts I've seen in all over India, he traveled, we know, I can conclude that there is no text which is not corrupted, which is not very corrupted by interpolation, extraction, and wrong changes. So he says that about the Mahabharata. That's why sometimes even if you hear stories from Mahabharata, we should be okay if it's not again spoken by the acharyas. And Bhagavad Gita, by the way, it is in all the versions the same. That's retained. Therefore, everyone accepts in all the sampradayas that Bhagavad Gita is traya. The three pramanas, the three main sources of truth. These are the Upanishads. The Gita is the other one. And Vedanta Sutra. So the Gita is universal, but there are many stories, so we might not be sure. So better be hear them from the proper source. That's the Madhvacharya's point, that he says, so because of the text very corrupted, you have to understand it through the proper devotee who has spiritual vision. So that's one thing. The other is, of course, you might say, "Why we're reading Prabhupada?" But we may be confused. Also, here says one thing, in the other place it seems he says the opposite thing. What is it? So then, usually, what we have to do is don't rush in conclusions. We have to examine as much as possible statements and nowadays it's very easy by different searches, and then you look at different statements on a certain topic, and again you have a comprehensive view. But most important, you have to be unbiased, and that doesn't doesn't require to be very spiritually elevated above the modes. We are conditioned, but at least you can be honest in approaching the Shastra. I will study it, you can't say really objectively, but not with prejudice. Bhaktivinoda Thakur speaks about these prejudices, how they're real impediment to advancement in bhakti. So if you look with prejudice, then there is a great chance that you interpret it in a certain way, which may not be. So you should try at least. Of course, we all have prejudices somehow and some conceptions, but if you're open when you hear different points and different angles, then you can change. If you have a preconception of something, you can change, because yes, okay, I'm convinced now. This is the Brahminical way. In a debate, you argue, and then if the other one is giving more sound arguments based on Shastra and logic, then you accept. Yeah, okay, I change. Nowadays, this is so, we don't follow, people don't follow, and devotees also, the standard rules of argumentation, because there are differences of opinion, but we instead of making it a proper philosophical discussion, becomes jalpa, and there are all different kinds of discussions, types of discussions where egos are involved, all kinds of things, and it doesn't lead to actually ascertaining the truth. It just becomes either confrontation or meaningless, or your motivation is just to win whatever the argument. But traditionally, it requires a certain honesty. Then you lay out you understand first of all the others very well, the other position. Then you lay out your own and make a conclusion. And if the other bring stronger arguments and evidence, then you accept. But if you try to juggle from here and there and just show, then okay, we're all conditioned, but there you add more to that, and it's very difficult to make a statement. At least some things should be quite clear. I mean, Shastra speaks of in a certain way. That's it. You can't just change it. I mean, again, example related to women, which was a topic, and probably still is, of contention of women giving dikshas. I'm not going to discuss this, but just an example. The different parties, they all have their arguments. I'm not valuing this, but one is giving a shastra is probably the only one which says women should not give, should not be guru, which it's not mentioned, diksha, should not become guru. And that's in Agama Shastra, which is Bharadvaja Samhita. So, which, and we know, with this type, we follow in the initiation process the Pancharatrika system, not the Vaidika system. And the Pancharatrika says, no matter where you are born, what family you are born, if you, that's the quotes from Hari Bhakti Vilas, if you receive proper purification and initiation, you become qualified Vaishnava. It doesn't matter your Varna, even if you are outside of the Varnashrama. And Sanatana Goswami gives example, just like this bell metal becomes transformed by being touched by the touchstone, etc. So, and then when discussions of Guru is there, he says, so when one chooses Guru, the best is to find out a pure qualified Brahmana, someone born in Brahminical family and being trained and raised like that. So it's a better option. But if there is no, you take any, from any Varna, any qualified Vaishnava, and then he also quotes, the most important is to be Vaishnava, because even if someone is Brahmana but is not Vaishnava, cannot teach even himself or save himself, what to speak of others, cannot be Guru at all. So anyway, these are the verses that anyone can be a teacher if he's properly qualified. Of course, that's the statement of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. If you have Krishna Tattva, if you know the science of Krishna, and you can be a guru. So anyway, two verses from this Bharadvaja Samhita, and one of the verse, I've seen now quoted, and then here's the translation, and here's the Sanskrit given by the edition which they used. And here it says such and such nari, which means a woman, and here in the original, in the Devanagari, it says something different. It's not nari, it's another word. And I said, why it's changed now? That's the thing, you don't need to change it. It's there in the, you can fool someone, but if you look, if somebody who knows, well, it's changed. It doesn't speak about woman here. Anyway, and the second verse actually says three, women, Shudras, and low should not become guru. And in the next verse says, unless they are yoga siddhi, they are accomplished in yoga. And then the translation says, unless they are nitya siddhas. Where the verse says nitya siddha is a very specific concept for the Gaudiyas. It's not actually in the Shastra as it is. It doesn't say nitya siddha. It says if you are accomplished in yoga and you are connected with Ishvara, with God. And that's, that's a way of imposing your preconception and using, this is it, and then you kind of, the translation is only nitya siddhas. Yes, there are some women gurus in our sampradaya, like Janavema and others, a few exceptions, but they are all nitya siddhas. And then you quote that. You can argue with that, but don't use that quote because it doesn't say nitya siddha, it says something else. These are just some examples that one can. There are other arguments. I'm not going to say that. It's just one example. I'm not defending one or the other position, but certainly in the historical sense, there were examples, and not one. But that's another thing. If there are social considerations, that's a completely different question. But if you look strictly to Shastra and to history, this is what it is. You can't twist it, And there are details. Also, one quote from Prabhupada in a purport of the fourth canto. Was it fourth? Where Prabhupada says that it's fourth. Dhruva, the mother of Dhruva, being a mother of a woman, cannot initiate him. Oh, that's the Shastric statement that cannot initiate. But then first you look at the original, not edited version. It's a little different. It's not the same. That's another thing. Okay, it's just small change, but then changes the meaning, and then you construe a whole thing about one sentence. But the original, what Prabhupada said, is not the same. That's one thing. And then also the context. Like I quoted Brahma Vaivarta, don't take initiation from father, not just mother, and that's the main point there. And like that. So it's if you are unbiased, say, okay, let's examine all the evidence. This is what it is. Now you can make decision, and it may be based on philosophical, social, political, whatever reasons. That's the decision. It doesn't concern you, but at least when you examine the evidence, you have to be honest. That's, I think, anyone, even conditioned souls, can do. But if you have the prejudice or agenda, then it makes it complicated. Any last points? Okay. Thank you very much. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.